part of the board of the little sister of the Society for Research Software Engineering in Germany called deRSE. We just call ourselves the Society for Research Software. And I would like to give you an update on what we have been doing and are planning to do in the future. And I will focus on something that we've released in May as our first position paper, which is a collaborative paper on creating an environment for sustainable research software in Germany and beyond. Yes, but I think I should probably get started for those of you who haven't heard about deRSE yet, with a brief overview of what we've been up to. So basically, it's all started with the very first RSE conference in 2016, which I personally didn't attend, but I attended the WISPy workshop that preceded it, also in Manchester. And I found out from Simon Hetrick during the workshop that there has been some interest from Germany in starting something similar over here. And so he put me in touch with some of my German colleagues who are now on the board of the RSE with me together. So we basically said, we got together on a remote call, funnily enough, and decided to set up what we thought of as a chapter of the RSE Association in the UK. And it took us some time, but we finally managed to found our own national association proper, which has gained charitable status. I think we might have beaten the society to that, if not with a foundation date. It's basically 6 people on the board. So that's me, it's Stefan Janosch, who you might have seen on the left-hand side, and then Daniel Nüst, Frank Löffler, Bernadette Fritsch, Martin Hamich, and myself. It's a pretty generic German association setup. So we have 2 secretaries and 2 chairs and 2 treasurers, and that's it. I quite envy the structure you have in the UK, which I think is more open towards community collaboration, but I might come to that later. And then once we've set this up, we started organizing our first conference. So it's basically a copycat from the RSE conference, and we ran that last year in Potsdam. We had beautiful weather and lots of people there, quite a large UK delegation as well. I think 10 people from the UK RSE community were there. And yeah, that's been a great success, we thought. And after that, we pretty much had everything set up. We've run the conference and we were thinking about the things we wanted to do next. And the first outcome of this is that in May 2020, we published our first position paper. And we started to plan the deRSE 20 conference, which obviously is not going to happen this year, but I guess that some of you may know or may have heard about this already. We have good news in the pipeline, and this will all be revealed on coming Tuesday. So the state of the RSE at the moment is basically, we do have 4 regional chapters, 1 in Berlin, 1 in Munich, 1 in Münster, and 1 in Jena and Thuringia. We have about 50 full members and a much larger community, which we can't really keep good track of because that's basically people active on the mailing list and in the Rocket chat. So like I said, we founded the Society for Research Software, but now what? And one of the things we've done is try and find ways to get the community on board, because with a small association board of 6 people, you can theoretically have really kind of centered activity and the community will stay on the outside. So we devised some sort of community process to find out what the community actually wants us to support. And we just call this the community position process, to develop positions that the deRSE association should take and should defend against the outside world, etc., and should try to implement. And this is basically a collaborative process where members of the community can suggest a position that deRSE should take and issue a call via the mailing list, and then people can come together and work collaboratively to describing the position they want the society to take. And this then, once the first draft is finished, this goes out to the community for a review phase, where the whole community has the chance to comment. And the first position paper we've published has been a collaboration with a large group of projects funded under a call that's been issued by the DFG, which is the largest German research funder for basic research in Germany. And they issued a call called Research Software Sustainability in 2017, if I remember correctly. And there's been huge demand, and people have like they've got lots of proposals. I think they were oversubscribed by a factor of 20 or something. And in the end, 25 projects got funded. And we got together pretty quickly within, I'm funded under this call as well with one of my linguistic software projects. And we got together pretty quickly thinking that it would be good to issue our idea of software sustainability and what it means for the current situation of research software and RSEs, with a focus on Germany. But also obviously some of the topics we wanted to address had a larger scope than just Germany. They could be true for other countries and even other continents. So we met up at the deRSE 19 conference last year in a workshop, and we started kind of surveying the community of these projects and have come up with a draft for a paper. And then we ran, and this is the picture below the RSE picture. Oops, sorry. Together again for a dedicated 2-day workshop to draft a paper proper in Berlin. That was November and 2019. And I think there was about 50 people there. We put in lots of work, and we came up with a good final draft of the paper, which we then submitted back to the RSE community for review. And this has taken a while. We found out quickly that it's probably not a very good idea to use GitHub pull requests and reviews on GitHub for commenting and reviewing and suggesting changes to a 20+ pages paper. But we followed it through, and in the end, we had a good result with great collaboration from the community. So this then went to phase 3 of the community process, the decision phase, which then basically consisted of the board kind of ticking the box and saying, yes, this is something that we would like to adopt as an official position of deRSE. And we published this decided on paper in 2 forms. First up as an actual paper with F1000 research, which is currently in open peer review. We've had 2 reviews and 1 long comment and quite a number of views and downloads already. And we also published it as a dedicated deRSE position paper. And this is what I'd like to talk about now for a minute before coming to some other news from deRSE. So it is a pretty grand title, an environment for sustainable research software in Germany and beyond, current state, open challenges, and call for action. And this is because we wanted not only to give the funder, so DFG, who's funded these 25 projects who've put in the initial work into the paper, guidelines that they can then take up and transform into policies, because this is something they've been asking for. But also, we wanted to use this form to motivate a German SSI, a Software Sustainability Institute, which we have been talking about within deRSE for quite some time. So we tried to cover lots of topics in this paper, and partly to motivate this DESSI, as we like to call it. And the background is generally the position we find, or most of us will probably find ourselves in, mainly that sustainable research software and the creation of it and the use of it is not sufficiently incentivized due to a number of factors. So what we wanted to say is we wanted to highlight the importance of research software in general as a proper research product. We wanted to stress the importance of software sustainability for a number of stakeholders and research in general. We wanted to identify the challenges we face, and partly specific to Germany, but like I said, also within a larger scope, kind of international scope. And we wanted to specifically target decision makers in funding and in policy to increase awareness of the issues we're facing and the issues we need to resolve in order to, well, have better software and then better research, or proper research, as you might say. The topic areas we've covered in the paper are the motivation for sustainable software from the viewpoint of a different number of stakeholders, the selection processes that can be put in place in order to select the software that should actually be sustained. And as you can guess, this is something that's been discussed quite furiously, because obviously you always want your own software to be funded. We have discussed RSEs as a very, very central point in the whole process of sustaining research software. And then aspects of funding, infrastructure, and the laws that apply. And I'm going to quickly go through most of these topic areas so you have a good idea of what this is about. The links are provided here on the slides, which I'm going to publish and share just after the discussion session, are on the bottom here. So the left one, archive, is the RSE position paper version, and the right one is obviously the F1000 research version. And they don't differ at the moment. They may be later on. So the claim that we make in terms of the motivation for software sustainability in the paper is that all stakeholders in research software actually benefit from having more sustainable research software, but the motivations differ. And we've identified the stakeholders that you can see here on the right-hand side. Some of those might be a bit surprising to some. I would like to give you some examples to let you know why we thought that some of these are actual stakeholders in research of software sustainability and what their motivations are. So the general public, for example, benefits from research which supports the common good, or you can say research which creates a better world and creates a better world faster. And obviously that's something that sustainable research software can provide. Also, taxpayers as a subset of the general public have a clear interest in the economical use of the tax money. And then again, another subset of the general public might be interested in citizen science, and therefore in sustainable in terms of being easy to reuse and understand research software. The second example would be research funding organizations. We think that they do have an inherent interest in sustainable software because it allows them to direct more resources towards what we've termed actual research. And we clarified that this is actual research in contrast to the recreation of software that actually exists. And obviously this would kind of sustainable software can help increase the return on investment for these research funding organizations because they dedicate less resources to simply recreating the same or a very similar piece of software over and over again and promote reuse instead. And then we've added geopolitical units, and by this we mean kind of larger conglomerates, larger groups of nations such as the EU. We mean countries, but it goes all the way down to communities and councils. And we think that they also have some sort of strategic interest to be independent of other geopolitical units, and especially in terms of, say, embargoes on information flow that might be put in place in specific political situation. But also sustainable software that's kind of coming from a specific community or a geopolitical unit can help attract researchers and companies in the research and technology sector. Also, the last stakeholder group we have on here is independent open source developers. And we think that their motivation for sustainable software is because it helps them get involved in research software, especially if we talk about open source research software, even if they're not employed by a research institution themselves. And this may help them get in contact then with other developers from that specific research field, and may potentially lead to collaborations or job opportunities in research. And then we've thought about the selection processes that may have to be put in place for selecting which research software is being sustained and sustainably funded. Obviously, the hypothesis being that not all software can be funded. And the elephant in the room is obviously what can be the criteria for selection. And we've divided those over 3 groups. So we have criteria, selection criteria for usage and impact, for software quality, and for maturity. And I'm sure that some of these will probably start discussion and while they're being discussed. I guess there may be different opinions on some of these. And just as an example, for usage and impact criteria, of which we've defined 5 in total, one criterion for funding, sustainably funding research software, is that it should be used beyond a single research group, and that the scientific relevance and validity of the software is in some way documented in at least one peer-reviewed scientific publication. And by this, we not only mean a paper, but this could also be a publication of the software itself, be it on JOS or as a standalone publication on Zenodo, etc. If you can put some sort of peer review in place, which is obviously something that's not implemented in Zenodo itself, but I think we should find ways around this and implement an open peer review process for research software. And also, obviously, another criterion is that it would be good if we had some sort of market analysis, which can show that the software is important to a user base of a relevant size and is either unique in its field or is one of the main players, so to speak, in a field where we have different solutions, software solutions for one problem. A lot of the software quality criteria come from software engineering. Some come from the ongoing discussion about software sustainability in general. So some of the criteria pertaining to software quality are that the source code should be publicly available, that it should be developed using a version control, and that it has documentation, and especially both user documentation, so all the things you need, such as requirements, how to install it, how to get started with the software, a user manual proper if it's a large piece of software, release notes, etc. But also developer documentation. So you have a development guide as well as API documentation within the code or outside of it. And other documentation that may apply in terms of maintenance, for example. And then lastly, we have 5 criteria for maturity. So for example, that the software has a complementary, comprehensive and up-to-date software management plan, that it has a defined point of contact, and also lines out in the documentation how potential contributors are invited to participate and whether there's a process for participation in place. And the general recommendations that we've come up with for the paper and for the position is that it would be good to have a 3-step selection process, of which the first step would be that there is a general screening of the software, and that is 2-sided. So you have a software quality screening, which is more of a kind of software engineering screening on the one hand, but you also have a scientific quality check on the other hand, where domain researchers with some knowledge or expertise in software can check whether everything that's implemented is actually accurate and correct in the way it should be. And once we've kind of weeded out all the software that wouldn't actually fall or that don't fulfill enough criteria, then the remaining software will go into an open review. And this is especially important because this is the point where the reviewers and the funders and the PIs and the developers of the software and the user base can get in touch with each other and discuss whether the actual single criteria, the selection criteria, have been fulfilled for the software. And then if that's successful, then the software should be sustainably funded. And obviously, because things change a lot, then this funding should be based on iterative evaluation. So it should be possible to phase out sustainable funding for software as well. One of the central questions is, who does the actual sustainment work? And obviously that's us, RSEs. We think that RSEs are the only people who have or can have the needed expertise to make software more sustainable. There are obviously challenges, we all know about them. Some of us still suffer from them, especially in Germany. I think with the establishment of a number of RSE groups in the UK, you're slightly better off. But, issues still exist. So, there is still no or little awareness or recognition. The career options are very, very limited, especially in Germany. I'll come to that later on. And the lack of formal training for people that are potential RSEs is evident. And the recommendations are the ones you probably know by heart now. So establishment of an RSE role, establishment of career structures at institutions, more education and training in terms of RSEing, and also resources for community building, because we think that sustainable software needs a working community around it in order to sustain. In terms of funding, we think that there are 4 pillars that should be funded, 4 pillars of funding. We call them ERIC. First up is education and training. And this is everything from carpentries to kind of more specific, domain-specific workshops. Obviously, RSEs need to be more sustainably funded because, especially in Germany, where we have a very strong tradition of fixed-term contracts for people who kind of sneak into a project to do some software work and then have to leave after 3 years. And the legal restrictions we have in place for these fixed-term contracts, namely that you have to qualify after a maximum of 6 years doing fixed-term work. So you have to do your PhD, and then you have to kind of habilitate from that in the next stage, is something that's totally detrimental to RSE work. Infrastructure needs to be funded as well, because the hardware evolution is ongoing, and we do need some hardware for sustainable research software development in terms of CI pipelines, etc., but also in terms of HPC resources. So that needs to be there. The expertise is still lacking in some communities, especially. I know that because I'm from the humanities, linguistics, and digital humanities, so expertise in research software engineering is still at a fairly low level. We're trying to change that. And community funding, as mentioned, is also a challenge because it's just not there. And the recommendation based on that in the paper is that we call for new funding schemes, especially for longer-term software funding. And this means basically longer-term funding for software projects, but also specifically for the people behind it, so the RSEs and the maintainers and the documentation people, which can all be subsumed under the term RSE. We need, for computing centers and HPC facilities, some sort of earmarked budget which will help them deal with the challenges of sustainable software development and running resources sustainably as well. And we would like to see funding schemes for the creation of open educational resources. We'd like to see funding for documentation work that's currently part of, well, theoretically part of the software work that is done in projects, but as you may know, in lots of cases, it just doesn't happen because there's no time. And we'd like to see funding for community care. Quickly touch upon the infrastructure point. We think that infrastructure is needed for sustainable research software development and maintenance, and those are mainly project management tools. We need training and knowledge exchange resources. We need a proper infrastructure for software publication and discovery, and this is one of the areas that I do work in terms of software citation. So we do need archives, we need indexers, we need to find a good way for software discovery, which is a huge problem, and probably the reason for lots of kind of redevelopment of existing solutions. Some of the infrastructure is already in place. We have things like DOIs for software with Zenodo, for example. We have some metadata standards with which software can be described and then subsequently found or discovered, such as code meta, and more specifically citation metadata in the citation file format. But we need to make sure that this infrastructure is in place, especially if we're looking at not only sustaining the software code itself, but also its runtime environment and the context, and use container solutions such as Docker. And one of the things that we talk about in the paper, that not only should the container itself be archived, for example, but also it needs more metadata to go with it, additional metadata, and maybe a format that allows exchange between repositories and also exit strategies. And the example we give is the Baggett container format, which I don't know very much about personally, but I guess that some of you might have heard about it. And this is the last and probably driest aspect of the paper, section of the paper, and it's also the one that's most German-centric, is legal aspects. So the challenges obviously are the knowledge about legal aspects in software development and publication, and the awareness that there are challenges is still fairly low. The chain of rights isn't always clear. The identification of right holders is problematic, especially if you only have user handles in GitHub, for example. And some projects also may run into liability issues. So the recommendations from us in this point is clearly document the chain of rights as well as you can. Use FLOSS licenses, because not only will they help, if you can, and not only will they have help discovery and reuse, or so we think, but some of them might also mitigate the liability problems. And the most important thing that we recommend is to put in place a German SSI, which will help set up and provide help to the institutional research software task forces that we also need. And these task forces have the objective to establish help desks, for example, and create knowledge and also knowledge exchange within the institution. And we do have a bonus in the paper as well, which is we have included a narrative, a fictional narrative about a person called Kim, who is a postgrad PhD student, but becomes an RSE, and the paper follows the career of Kim in parallel to going through the sections. So you have an idea what we envisage this might actually look like in reality. Yeah, so that was a brief summary of some of the points in the paper. I encourage you to please read it and comment. You can comment on the F1000 research page. You can also comment via the deRSE mailing list or via GitHub. There are different ways. And just very quickly before I finish, other news, what we're trying to do and what I'd like to get your thoughts on, specifically as the UK RSE Leaders group, is that we try to push things forward in 2+ directions. So one thing is, one problem we have is that we don't really know the community in Germany that well, or the structure, the RSE landscape, so to speak. So we've started a collaborative document where we ask people to please self-identify the RSE groups they work in. And by groups, I mean actual groups at an institution that do RSE work. And also provide some information about the funding models. And we found that so far we've had, within the last week and a half, 15 groups come forward. with different funding models. Most of them are underwritten and have additional project grants. Some have institutional funding, are completely underwritten, and some of them also don't specify it. We only have 3 university groups, which is a bit scary, seeing that especially in the UK, you have lots of RSE groups at universities. And we have a wide range of domains covered from these groups. Everything from aerospace to Romano-Germanic archaeology, digital humanities, computer science, etc. So that's something we really want to do, is try and find existing RSE groups. Obviously, it's a problem because they're not called RSE groups. They're called something else. They're called software support group or something domain specific. And perhaps you have good ideas how we can go about this. And the other thing we're trying to do within the deRSE Association is that we are thinking about forming working groups. There's a German saying that if you don't know what to do, you just form a working group. We have lots of ideas, so we really know what to do, but we have to concentrate on specific things. And I would like to pick your brains about whether you think these are good topics to start with as an association or from the context of an RSE group. And are there things that we should know or we need to know when setting up such working groups? So one thing we would like to concentrate on in the next period of time, say in the next year or so, is come up with a job description and create vacancy templates for people to reuse that actually use the term research software engineer and perhaps have some domain specific information that as well, just to make it easier to kind of establish the term in Germany. Because obviously, as you've seen, one of the problems we have in identifying RSE groups is that they don't call themselves RSEs yet. I think the second point is fairly clear. We want to establish something like we have here in Germany as well, because we think it's beneficial if people that actually run a group, lead a group, or kind of are part of a community get together every now and then and exchange ideas and help each other out. And then one thing we've found interesting in the early stages of the SSI is that they've become the regional coordinator for the carpentries. And because our setup is a bit different in Germany, we haven't had the SSI first, and then we've had the RSE Association, but it's the other way around. We don't have an SSI yet, but we want to have one. We were thinking about making deRSE the core of the German SSI and take on the role as regional coordinator for the carpentries and also devise other specific training for research software in Germany via deRSE. And we're in contact with the carpentries in order to do that. And then we have the NFDI. The NFDI is the Nationale Forschungsdateninfrastruktur, which is the National Research Data Infrastructure. It's basically a funding scheme for consortia, domain consortia that come together and set up sustainable research data management. And we've found out early on that A, this would give us funding, and B, there is no consortium that actually covers the cross-cutting topic of research software across this infrastructure. So we've put in some work in creating a proposal, and this is an ongoing process. We've faced some challenges, namely that cross-cutting topics will not be funded in any of the 3 phases of the infrastructure, which is a bit sad, but we're still on the case. The conference is cancelled this year, but look forward to next Tuesday where we'll have more news. And I'm sorry for running slightly over my